Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, Senior Writing Coach with Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 22, Motivational Writing Blocks. As you might have heard, in the last 2 weeks now, we've been focusing on working through different types of writing blocks. The first week of the series, episode 20, we focused on technical writing blocks. Those are the blocks where you don't know how to solve a particular problem, but once you've solved it, you can keep going. We've also talked about just general paralysis, where you haven't been writing for a while. Where you're stuck and you don't know how to move yourself forward. So sometimes this can be you physically can't do it. You might have anxiety about doing it. You might be frustrated as in, why am I not writing? I've always been able to do it before. So we focused on those two things. So I encourage you to go back and check out those episodes. But this week, we're going to focus on motivational writer's blocks, which for me, these are a little different from paralysis, because I would argue, and I gave a good example of how paralysis had hit me very recently last week, but I would argue that you can be very motivated to write and still not have it happen. And that's what I talked about in the episode last week. But this week, I want to talk about the motivational problem where you're not really motivated. You've got all kinds of things happening. So really for me, this can take the form of two things. One can be the excuses and lies you sort of tell yourself to get out of writing. And then the other one can be you flat out just don't want to do it. Okay, so we're going to walk through those two things. So let's start with the easier ones. And I actually want to recommend a totally fabulous book. I mentioned it before, Write No Matter What. Jolie Jensen, she has a really fabulous chapter in part 3 of her book. It's on challenging some writing myths. And you can basically, in her book, go and just find whatever your writing problem is, find that chapter, and the chapters are just like a page or two. They're not very long at all. And there's some really good concrete advice. So I know a couple of the ones that she talks about, and we've all maybe heard before, would be something like, oh, I've got to clean my office before I start writing. My office is a disaster. So maybe I'll take a picture of it and post it in the show notes. That's not true, because I'm still putting out the goods. I really actually am going to take a picture for you guys, because it is quite terrible. So this isn't something that has to happen. You don't have to have a totally neat office or a neat, desk to be able to tackle writing. And she walks you through that. So that's a common one. There's also many other ones related to, especially for doctoral students and even some faculty members struggling with, say, imposter syndrome, where you think, oh, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I don't deserve to be here. I'm not good enough to be here. Certainly all of those things can contribute to a lack of motivation, where you might be telling yourself, well, I'm not going to write because whatever I put out is not going to be correct or good or received well, or all those things that we tell each other or tell ourselves about our writing. So, certainly those are some excuses, but I want to get into some other ones that are trickier. I had a client last year that I was walking through some issues about why she wasn't writing. And when I thought about what she said, is that some of the things that she would say to me were very logical as to why she wasn't writing. And so these are traps I think we sometimes fall into. I know in the Jolie Jensen book, she does talk about the myth of finding one more source. This is very common, where people will say, oh, well, I just got to find one more source. I need to do more research before I can start writing. That's certainly a common one, but here's some other ones that are kind of tricky. Sometimes you might be not motivated to write. And so what you'll do is you'll say, well, I'm gonna, get in a writing group, and then the writing group lapses into some academic conversation, or maybe conversations about your project, but then you don't do anything with it. And then you say, well, I went to my writing group, I got some stuff done. That's a common one, where you still don't have the motivation. You maybe had the motivation to go to the group, but maybe you didn't have enough to complete the project. But there's definitely some other ones. Other excuses that you might tell yourself would be things like, well, I've really got to prep for my classes first. And this is very, very common, especially for new faculty, because they're worried about their student evaluations on a tenure case, or if you're a non-tenure track faculty, worried about contract renewal. And so, you say, oh, I got to get all my teaching stuff done. I will link to an article that I did for Inside Higher Education on how to streamline your teaching prep, which helps you cut down on that time spent on that. So you have more time for writing. So that might be a way to get over the hump, because teaching doesn't have to be quite as time consuming as we often make it. That's another good one. But I think the other problem, if we get to the other side of it, where you just don't want to, let's explore that for a couple minutes, because that's real. There are some people, I actually just talked to a longtime professor in my discipline of rhetoric and writing, that confessed to me that she hates to write. She's had a career for like 40 plus years, and she still hates it. She still dreads every article. She dreads every textbook. And here's the thing, that I think she kind of laughed when she said it, and maybe hate is too strong of a word. She doesn't enjoy it, and that's okay. There's a lot of parts of academic work that we may not enjoy. I've met tons of faculty. I do a lot of counseling at my university with faculty writing groups, and I've met many faculty who love research. They love being in the lab. They love making the new findings. They love, communicating those findings at a conference. They'll talk about their research all day. But given the point where they have to actually sit down and start navigating what that would look like in a manuscript, then they don't really want to do it anymore, or it loses its thrill. So, certainly there's a lot of ways to think about overcoming something like that. So, the reality is you may just not like writing, or at least not like it more than you like other parts of your job. You find serving on a service committee more preferable, or teaching, and that's all well and good. But we understand that the realities of the academic market are that in most academic positions, you do have to do some academic writing. And so I want to explore, just to kind of close this out, a couple of ways you might think about doing it in a way that makes it less painful and maybe more motivating. The best strategy that I have ever seen on this is actually doing a conference presentation on your subject, on your research, that you don't have to make a manuscript for. So this is very discipline specific, but some disciplines you do more TED Talk style, or you can make PowerPoint slides. So you've got some text on there, but not a lot. And you've got pictures and graphs and all that kind of stuff. So you might enjoy making a presentation, but you just don't enjoy doing converting that over to an article. I do a lot with faculty here on my campus about trying to convert those PowerPoints into articles. And I definitely will do a podcast on that specifically, like how to actually do that. But one of the things that can help is that if you do a presentation, I always tell my faculty, you're like 60% there. You're more than halfway there, because you've already got a design laid out. It's already got a structure. It's got an introduction. It's got transitions. It's got conclusions. You might even have some graphs or some visual material made. So that can certainly be one way to get around the motivation, is to find a conference first. Because the other motivating thing, is we've probably all experienced, is the deadline. So if you have a conference deadline coming up, that might be just enough of a fire to get you to make the slides. And then you can start working with the slides to make the manuscript. So again, I will do that in a future podcast episode, because I've got a really straightforward way to walk through and do that. So that could be something that's motivating. Another thing that you can do is, I'm not above a bribe. So if you are watching this live on YouTube, I have very nice nails. I got a manicure. I don't know if you can actually see them on there, but I got a manicure because my one daughter was kind of not very motivated to go to school, and we've been kind of working on it. And I promised her a manicure if she would do her academic work. And she's been, working for a couple of weeks and all that. So last night we went and got her manicures. Well, that was very motivational for her, because then today she gets to go to school and show off her manicure. So sometimes it helps to have something like that. So if there's a treat you can hold out on a little bit, I know many people that won't allow themselves to, get whatever, like a small daily treat until they do their writing. and this is kind of how I feel about exercise in the gym. I do it. I don't love it, but I do it. Thinking about ways that you can knock it off in a way that you sit down, you do your business, and then you get out and go ahead and go on with the rest of your day. There's many ways you could think about carving up time to do this. So I know we've talked about Pomodoro technique. You've heard of that maybe before, where you just set a timer for 20 minutes, go as hard as you can, and then you take a break. Maybe that's what you need to do for a little while, is just a couple of those 20 minutes. I'm just going to sit down and write as much as I can. I know I'm trying to think in the paralysis, right? I had to think about that for a second. In the paralysis writing blocks episode, I did talk about audio recording. Big fan of that, because sometimes not wanting to write doesn't mean you don't want to talk about your project. You actually do want to talk about it. You just don't want to actually physically type it. So getting the audio down and having it convert into text can be helpful. So I mentioned the InkPad app last week to do something like that. You could also think about falling in love with your project again. I know in February, we did a series of podcast episodes about how to get yourself back excited about your research and excited about writing again. One of the reasons you may not be motivated is because you're in some kind of a rut. Maybe that same coffee shop you've been working at for a long time isn't working for you anymore, or you're just flat out tired of writing at home during COVID. While we're still at the time of this recording, we're still kind of experiencing some of the limitations of the pandemic. So, you might think about that. I know they always say we have a check written and ready to mail to a charity you hate or an organization that you hate, if you don't do your writing. I don't know if that works, but if you think something like that might work for you, you can also leave a good prize at the end. So for example, I really want a row machine because I'm not real motivated to work out, but for some weird reason, I like the rowing machine. So for me, when I finish my book, that's what I want to buy myself, is a rowing machine. Once I get the whole thing, final proofs, the whole thing is in, it's ready to go to be published. That's what I'm going to have. So I've sort of a big prize at the end. So maybe a big prize could work it out. And lastly, I would really think about your schedule a little bit. One of the ways that motivation kind of gets us is that we save stuff we don't want to do until the end of the day, or we're too tired, or we try to do it at a time that it just does not work for us. So for people that are not morning people, stop trying to write early in the morning unless you absolutely have to, because that's the only time you have. It's just adding another layer of distress and discomfort that just makes it even more unappealing. So I personally like writing early in the morning when my kids are asleep, just because sometimes that is the only time I have. But given the choice, if I had all factors all gone, I would definitely be an afternoon writer. Between 1 and 3 would be my sweet spot. So, now in the summer, I will have some of those times available to me, and I certainly will be moving things around to make sure I'm writing at the time that I feel like I'm most alert. I like writing at that time. Maybe some of those things can help you. So, I mentioned the Jolie Jensen book, and I would definitely encourage you to check it out, because the other chapter in there the other part in there that's really great is that she talks about maintaining your momentum. And I think one of the things with motivation is that writing sometimes is so discouraging. You could have a fabulous day of writing where you crank everything out, and then the next day, everything's a mess. You don't like your section. You can't find anything. You've spent 3 hours on the same paragraph. You're just frustrated. And that is one of the things. The highs are really high with academic writing, but they also can be really low. And I love, she's got lots of different ways to keep you interested and motivated in your writing project. So I would say you're just looking for a quick motivational book, she's got a really good one out there. But if you've got other strategies you want to share, we're happy to have you post them on Twitter. Please do. You can tag this episode, tag Defend and Publish in it, and keep the conversation going, because it's a tricky thing. So if you know some ways that you've kind of gotten over that hump of being unmotivated to write, please share them with us, and happy writing this week.